Fuck off, man. Harsh words from Hamilton to Leclerc in the paddock after the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. Don't miss the ending to see Leclerc's shocking reply. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. The roaring engines had barely gone silent when the scene at Imola descended into an atmosphere of palpable tension, one that electrified the paddock long after the final lap. The Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, anticipated to be a symbolic turnaround for Ferrari and a quiet resurgence for Mercedes, turned into a cauldron of drama, igniting a storm of controversy that would dominate headlines for days. The central spark in this emotional explosion came in the form of a fiercely disputed on-track confrontation between two of the sport's most prominent names, Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc. The clash, already incendiary due to the context and setting, escalated beyond racing lines and track limits, bleeding into post-race interviews, garage politics, and even regulatory deliberations at the highest levels of Formula One governance. Everything began to unravel during the latter stages of the race, specifically on lap 46, shortly after the final wave of pit stops had cycled through. Hamilton, driving with surgical precision and demonstrating exceptional tire management, had been methodically carving his way through the midfield, aided by Mercedes' surprisingly effective pace on the medium compound. The W15, which had struggled earlier in the weekend with rear-end instability and poor corner exit grip, seemed to come alive as the fuel load lightened and Hamilton dialed in his rhythm. Meanwhile, Leclerc, who had been running a defensive race on worn rubber, found himself grappling with increasing levels of thermal degradation and brake overheating. Ferrari had taken an aggressive strategic gamble, executing an early undercut that briefly handed their driver track advantage but came at the cost of tire longevity. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. As Hamilton approached the Variante Alta chicane, he closed the gap with relentless precision, setting purple mini-sectors and lining up what appeared to be a textbook overtake. The move was well-timed, executed under braking with a confident lunge to the inside line. But rather than conceding space or adjusting his trajectory, Leclerc made a snap decision that would shape the entire narrative of the weekend. The Ferrari driver, under immense pressure from the home crowd and conscious of every tenth of a second slipping away, turned in sharply. The result was a sudden and narrow block that left Hamilton with virtually no escape route. Reacting instinctively, Hamilton tried to minimize contact, but a slight lockup on the front right tire caused the Mercedes to bounce over the inside curb, launching the car momentarily into the air. The impact upon landing was severe enough to damage the floor and compromise aerodynamic efficiency for the remainder of the race. The consequences were immediate and measurable. Hamilton, who had been on course to challenge for a podium, began losing significant lap time, eventually slipping down the order to a disappointing 7th. His frustration was audible over team radio, where he questioned the legality and safety of Leclerc's defensive maneuver. Leclerc, despite retaining position, was audibly enraged by his own fading performance, slamming his steering wheel as he crossed the finish line in 5th. Both drivers crossed the line with unfinished business, and it didn't take long for the emotional residue to manifest into something far more explosive. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. As they rolled into Parc Ferme, emotions boiled over. Hamilton, still suited and helmeted, wasted no time confronting Leclerc. With the world watching, he approached the Ferrari driver in a direct and confrontational manner, gesturing animatedly while speaking through clenched teeth. The microphones caught snippets of the exchange, but body language told the full story, Hamilton accusing, Leclerc defending, both refusing to yield an inch. Leclerc, visibly irritated and red-faced, responded with equal intensity, waving off Hamilton's accusations and insisting he had every right to defend the corner as he did. The scene attracted an immediate crowd. Mechanics, media personnel, race officials, and team representatives converged, anticipating escalation. Toto Wolff, having reviewed the onboard telemetry in the garage moments earlier, was already on his way to the steward's office with a copy of the data in hand. The Mercedes principal was uncharacteristically livid, pushing for a formal post-race investigation. He cited clear evidence from the car's sensors that indicated Leclerc had made an abrupt steering input under braking, far from the racing line, which significantly reduced Hamilton's margin for safety. On the other side, Ferrari's camp stood their ground. Fred Vasseur defended his driver, emphasizing that hard racing was being criminalized and that the incident did not warrant further scrutiny beyond what race control had already deemed a non-penalizable racing incident. Behind closed doors, Mercedes strategists and engineers were dissecting every data point. They believed the move violated Article 27.4 of the sporting regulations, which mandates leaving a car width when defending into a corner. Moreover, GPS overlays showed that Leclerc's deceleration pattern was inconsistent with his previous laps, hinting at a last-second maneuver rather than a natural line through the chicane. The telemetry also recorded a sudden increase in brake pressure, a clue that further fueled accusations of reactive blocking. Hamilton's car, meanwhile, showed a 19% loss in downforce efficiency post-impact, a figure corroborated by the wind tunnel data simulations run after the race. While the FIA initially refrained from intervening further, public and internal pressure mounted rapidly. FOM released uncut radio communications from both cars. On Hamilton's side, the conversation was technical and precise, with his engineer encouraging him to capitalize on Leclerc's visible tire struggles. He's losing time on exit. Go for variante. Leclerc's exchange with his race engineer, however, drew particular attention. When asked if he should maintain pace or conserve his tires, the engineer hesitated before replying, "Do what you think you need to. It's your call." Some interpreted this as Ferrari subtly authorizing an ultra-defensive posture, allowing Leclerc to take liberties in how he managed his defense. Media coverage erupted into a frenzy. Broadcasters devoted entire segments to analyzing freeze frames of the incident, superimposing ideal racing lines and potential alternative outcomes. Theories exploded online, with fans splitting into tribal factions defending their hero. Prominent ex-drivers offered conflicting takes. Jenson Button called the move tight but not dirty, while Damon Hill suggested Leclerc was toying with the gray areas of legality. Sky Sports F1 ran a one-hour special featuring side-by-side footage of similar incidents from previous seasons to dissect whether precedent supported a penalty. In the official post-race press conference, the tension between the two drivers was palpable. Seated adjacent, they offered curt, clipped responses. Hamilton's demeanor was icy, and when asked if he felt Leclerc acted maliciously, he simply replied, "I've been in this sport long enough to know when a move is racing and when it's not. I'll leave it to the people watching to decide which that was." Leclerc, meanwhile, delivered a stinging rebuke. "I'm not in Formula One to give up corners. If that makes me unpopular, I'll live with that. I race with my instincts, and I stand by what I did." Neither driver acknowledged the other as they exited the room. The ripple effects continued well into the night. Mercedes filed a formal request for a right of review under the FIA's Article 14.1, submitting new onboard data and analysis. Ferrari issued a counter-statement warning against the overregulation of wheel-to-wheel racing, insisting that the sport risked becoming sterile if drivers were punished for defensive instincts. Elsewhere, Liberty Media held emergency discussions with the FIA to assess how the controversy might affect public perception and viewer trust, especially as the race had drawn record attendance and broadcast numbers. Within the team garages, the atmosphere was deeply divided. Hamilton's mechanics, who had worked tirelessly to get the W15 into fighting shape after a difficult FP3 session, were visibly dejected. Some reportedly voiced anger over what they felt was an avoidable incident caused by unnecessary aggression. Ferrari engineers, conversely, praised Leclerc for holding firm under pressure, though privately some admitted they were concerned about the optics of the clash, especially with internal evaluations ongoing regarding his contract renewal. Other drivers began weighing in publicly. George Russell, when asked if he would have made the same move as Hamilton, responded diplomatically but hinted at his agreement. "You've got to trust that there will be space. That's how we all race. When that trust breaks down, it gets dangerous." Oscar Piastri said he believed Leclerc's maneuver was over the edge, and Sergio Perez called for consistent stewarding, referencing a similar incident earlier in the season where a harsher penalty had been handed down for less contact. Back in Brackley, the Mercedes technical team launched a full forensic analysis of the car's damage, hoping to quantify how many championship points had been lost due to the contact. In Maranello, Leclerc's performance, both praised and criticized, became the subject of intense internal debriefs. With Ferrari's senior leadership set to announce structural changes ahead of the summer break, the incident became more than just a talking point. It became a case study in high-stakes decision-making and driver temperament. The incident at Variante Alta, born from a combination of tactical opportunism and emotional brinkmanship, transformed what should have been a story about redemption into a saga about rivalry, risk, and respect. It served as a reminder that while Formula One is a sport of milliseconds and millimeters, it is also driven by ego, ambition, and the indomitable human will to prevail. What transpired between Hamilton and Leclerc was not merely a racing altercation. It was a moment that would echo through the remainder of the season, redefining how both drivers approached each other on track, and reshaping how the world viewed their legacy battles. As the engines wound down and the sound of the roaring crowd gave way to scattered cheers and applause, the atmosphere around the paddock remained electric. The tension that had built over the course of the race still lingered like a storm cloud refusing to dissipate. The mechanics and engineers moved with urgency around the pit lane, analyzing data, inspecting components, and exchanging hurried words, but their eyes kept drifting toward the center of the unfolding drama. The post-race tradition had begun, drivers exiting their cockpits, removing their helmets, wiping the sweat from their brows, and preparing to engage in the customary handshakes and short, polite conversations. But this time, it was immediately evident that something was off. The energy between two of the most prominent figures on the grid, Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, was palpably volatile. Leclerc, still buzzing with adrenaline and unable to fully mask the frustration behind his composed exterior, walked forward toward the cluster of drivers. His eyes were fixed ahead, not on any one individual, but clearly scanning for someone. Hamilton, moving with a deliberate calmness, adjusted his fireproof balaclava around his neck, tucked his gloves under his arm, and made a sharp turn away from the rest. Without hesitation, he locked eyes with Leclerc and strode toward him, his expression unreadable, his steps firm and precise. Photographers instinctively raised their lenses. Broadcasters tightened their focus. The tension had become a spectacle, and everyone knew something unscripted was about to happen. As Hamilton approached, Leclerc extended his hand in what appeared to be a formal gesture, a token of civility after an incredibly heated battle on the track. But instead of reciprocating with even a modicum of respect, Hamilton grasped the hand with noticeable force, leaned in closely so that only Leclerc could hear, and muttered in a slow, venom-laced whisper, "Fuck off, man." There was no smile, no trace of humor, no ambiguity. His gaze was sharp and hostile, his words laced with deep-seated resentment. Leclerc's face shifted instantly. The moment hit him like a slap. His hand was yanked back, his lips parted slightly in disbelief, and for a brief moment, his entire body tensed as though he was preparing for something much bigger than a verbal exchange. Caught off guard, Leclerc muttered something under his breath in rapid French, a phrase muffled by the background noise and missed by most microphones. But whatever he said, it carried the unmistakable tone of someone who had just been publicly disrespected and wasn't going to let it go. His usual calm evaporated. His jaw clenched. Without waiting for any outside interference, he took a sharp step forward, closing the distance between himself and Hamilton with clear intent. "You think you can just say that to me after the way you drove today?" His voice was sharp, incredulous, his accent thickening under pressure. "You call that racing? You were dangerous out there." Hamilton didn't retreat, didn't blink. His breathing was heavy, chest rising and falling, the heat of the race still fresh in his bloodstream. "Me?" he shot back, his voice rising. "You're accusing me? You almost forced me into the barrier coming out of turn 11. That wasn't defense, that was recklessness." Spectators near the paddock began to notice. Team staff paused. Members of the media adjusted their earpieces and leaned in. Cameramen, still rolling, maneuvered for better angles, even as producers in the control rooms shouted into headsets to be ready to cut the feed if needed. The moment was becoming unstable. Leclerc jabbed a finger toward Hamilton's chest, not hard enough to shove, but enough to make a statement. "You always do this," he growled. "You drive like the rules don't apply to you. Every overtaking zone, every braking point, you act like it belongs to you. But guess what? It doesn't. Not anymore." Hamilton's expression tightened. "You're the one who nearly caused a high-speed collision. You chopped across the racing line without checking your mirrors. You drove like you had a death wish. That's not racing, Charles. That's negligence." Their voices were climbing with every sentence. What had begun as a private confrontation was rapidly escalating into a public altercation. Words were now weapons, launched without hesitation or restraint. Leclerc's composure had completely eroded, and Hamilton's patience had snapped. Then, in a moment of panic and urgency, Ferrari team principal Fred Vasseur burst through the crowd. His eyes wide with alarm, he pushed his way between the two drivers, raising both hands like a referee separating fighters in a ring. "Enough. Stop this right now," he shouted, his voice cracking under the pressure. "This isn't the time, this isn't the place. Both of you, walk away. Now." But neither driver budged. Hamilton's glare remained locked on Leclerc, and Leclerc's fists stayed clenched at his sides. The words Vasseur had spoken may as well have bounced off a wall. The emotional charge was too high. The wounds were still open, still bleeding. More team personnel hurried over, some placing hands on shoulders, others whispering urgent pleas for calm. Even rival team staff, Red Bull, Aston Martin, McLaren, began to observe the incident with a mix of concern and curiosity. At that point, broadcasters had cut to a wide shot, then away altogether, unwilling to show what was clearly about to erupt. But the cameras hadn't stopped filming. Footage was being recorded from multiple angles. Clips from mobile phones and behind-the-scenes crews quickly began circulating within private WhatsApp groups and social media circles. It didn't take long for the footage to leak. The unfiltered words, the gestures, the intensity, it all spread like wildfire. By the time both drivers were physically separated, Hamilton being led away by a Mercedes press officer, Leclerc being pulled back toward the Ferrari garage, the damage had been done. Journalists scrambled for reactions. Analysts immediately began to break down every aspect of the incident, comparing body language, reading lips, analyzing tone. Fans took to social platforms to express outrage, support, disbelief. Some defended Hamilton, citing Leclerc's dangerous defending throughout the race. Others backed Leclerc, claiming Hamilton's aggression was unacceptable and out of line. Back inside their respective team zones, the fallout was underway. Mercedes convened a crisis meeting within minutes. Ferrari's communications department worked frantically to prepare a public response. Engineers whispered about the likelihood of fines, maybe even suspensions. Some FIA officials were overheard discussing whether post-race behavior should be subject to penalties under the sporting code's clauses about conduct detrimental to the image of the sport. At the official press conference, both men were seated at opposite ends of the stage, separated by drivers who clearly did not want to be part of this storm. Hamilton wore sunglasses and remained mostly silent, refusing to comment directly on the confrontation. Leclerc answered questions with clipped, emotionless responses, his voice low, his eyes fixed on the floor or straight ahead. The chill between them could have frozen the room. Not a glance was exchanged. The tension had not subsided, it had calcified into something permanent. As the evening wore on, the story eclipsed everything else. No one talked about the race winner, the constructor standings, or even the dramatic strategies. Every headline, every news ticker, every motorsport blog focused solely on the fallout between two of the sport's biggest names. Former drivers weighed in on podcasts. Heated debates erupted on TV panels. Social media descended into tribal warfare. Hashtags, memes, slowed-down footage, amateur lip readers trying to interpret every moment. Within their motorhomes, both Hamilton and Leclerc received countless messages from friends, fellow athletes, and even executives urging them to de-escalate. But neither showed any sign of relenting. For both men, this wasn't just a single clash, it was the latest chapter in a simmering rivalry that had never truly been resolved. Their philosophies of racing, their sense of legacy, their place in the sport, they all collided in those chaotic minutes after the checkered flag. And with the next race only days away, the anticipation had turned to dread. Everyone knew the next time these two drivers met on track, they wouldn't be racing just for position. They'd be racing to make a point. And this time, no one could predict how far either would go. Inside the paddock, as the post-race chaos still buzzed around the circuit and camera crews scrambled to get reactions, Lewis Hamilton moved with unrelenting focus, slicing through the crowd with a purposeful stride that left no room for interruption. His suit was unzipped to his waist, the top half clinging to his hips, while his fireproof shirt stuck to his body from the mix of sweat and raw adrenaline. He didn't make eye contact with anyone. Not his mechanics, not the reporters shouting his name, not even the PR handlers trailing behind trying to catch up. He had one destination in mind, the heart of the Mercedes motorhome, away from the noise, away from the spectators, and away from the manufactured calm of the post-race interviews. As he stepped into the sleek high-tech sanctuary of the team's private quarters, the heavy door sealed shut behind him with a quiet thud, muting the outside world. Engineers sat around a circular table surrounded by data screens, speaking in hushed tones, eyes darting between numbers and slow-motion replays. At the center of it all stood Toto Wolff, arms crossed, staring intently at a frame-by-frame breakdown of the incident that had lit up social media within seconds and ignited debates in every corner of the paddock. The clash. The shutout at the chicane. The move by Leclerc. Lewis's entrance disrupted the static energy in the room like a lightning bolt. He tore the damp fireproof shirt over his head and flung it across a chair without looking. His gloves followed, landing with a thud on the black table, the knuckles still creased with tension. His face was stone, no trace of the usual post-race cool or practiced composure. It was etched with indignation, the kind born not from losing points, but from feeling wronged by someone who should have known better. Toto didn't waste time. He could read the storm building in his driver like an incoming tide. He stepped forward, voice calm but sharp. "Lewis," he began with deliberate control, "what exactly happened with Charles out there? The world saw it, but I want to hear it from you." Hamilton didn't sit. He remained standing, pacing slightly, then turning abruptly toward his team boss. "He waited," he said, voice low but laced with heat. "He waited until I committed, until I was fully beside him. Then he shut the door like he was closing the final lap in Monaco. There was no room. He knew it. That wasn't about defending, it was about punishing." Toto exhaled, exchanging a brief glance with the data analyst beside him. The younger man gave a short nod, tapping a screen that showed a burst of telemetry data from the turn in question. "There's a spike in steering input right before contact," he confirmed. "You lost close to 8% aerodynamic efficiency in the front wing immediately after. That's not minor. That's performance gone. Downforce compromised. Strategy destroyed." Hamilton's fists clenched at his sides. He did it with intent. It's not speculation. It's not just aggressive driving. That was personal. He's been building to this since we squeezed him wide at Bahrain. He's been simmering, waiting for a chance to make a statement. And today, he made one. "With my car." Toto rubbed his jaw, absorbing every word. "The onboard footage supports your take." He had a microsecond to make a decision, and he chose the one that would force contact. The kind of move that skirts the edge of plausible deniability. It's not reckless, not clumsy. It's calculated, and that makes it more dangerous. Hamilton nodded grimly, walking to the window where he could see the Ferrari crew celebrating like the incident had never happened, like the contact was just another footnote in a race filled with glory. "He thinks he got one over me. That he's earned respect by slamming the door and holding position. But respect isn't taken by force, it's built over years of fair racing. He just demolished his." Toto took a seat, gesturing for Lewis to join him. "Look, we'll initiate a full report. I'll speak with the race director. We'll present every piece of data we have. The FIA may or may not act. This sport's politics run deeper than fairness sometimes. But that's not the part that matters most. What matters is how you respond. You don't let this become emotional warfare. You don't give him the satisfaction of knowing he's rattled you." Lewis sat down finally, not to rest, but to contain the fire burning inside him. This isn't about emotion. It's about standards. We've all had battles, wheel to wheel with Fernando, with Max, even with Nico when things were tense. But they knew where the line was. This kid doesn't. He thinks hard racing means erasing the line altogether. Toto's eyes didn't blink. He's hungry. He's under pressure at Ferrari. He's trying to reinvent himself as the alpha there, especially with the eyes of Maranello constantly watching. But hunger doesn't excuse recklessness. You don't need to prove anything. Your record speaks louder than any highlight reel he's trying to make for Instagram. Hamilton leaned forward, voice quieter but colder. "He wants to play games? Fine. But I've been in this arena long enough to know how it ends for people like him. One bad move too many, and suddenly he's the villain, not the prodigy. If he keeps this up, someone's going to get hurt. And if it's me next time, don't expect me to be so diplomatic." There was a weight to his words, not just threat, but promise. Not the kind of promise spoken in anger, but the kind that builds in silence, measured by seconds lost, chances ruined, and rivals who confuse silence for surrender. Toto adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, his mind already shifting into damage control, media strategy, internal team briefings. "We stay focused. We stay calm. Let Ferrari walk into their own trap if that's the road they've chosen. You keep delivering results. You keep driving like the legend you are. We'll win this championship by being relentless and precise, not emotional. Next time, when you line up behind him, you don't leave him an inch. But you do it clean." You do it your way." Hamilton gave a single nod. Not a nod of agreement, but of understanding. He didn't need revenge. He needed justice. And in Formula One, justice isn't served in statements or press releases. It's served in laps, in overtakes, in a checkered flag waving as you cross the line first while the other guy watches from his mirrors. He stood, picked up his gloves slowly, and looked one last time out the window at the Ferrari pit. His voice was a whisper, but every word was carved in steel. "He's playing with fire. And I've been burning longer than he's even been in this sport." Beyond the confines of the motorhome, the entire paddock had descended into a maelstrom of chaos and speculation. It wasn't just a media circus anymore. It was a full-blown eruption of scrutiny, emotion, and conflicting narratives. Broadcasters scrambled to adjust programming, sending correspondents sprinting to pit walls and hospitality suites in search of statements, reactions, or even the slightest hint of how deep the tension ran. The footage of the aborted handshake had gone viral at lightning speed, reshared on countless platforms, dissected from every possible frame, and transformed into a social phenomenon. The incident was no longer just a blip in the race. It had become the nucleus of a cultural flashpoint. Thousands of theories were circulating across the digital sphere, some outrageous, some eerily plausible, all trying to decode what Hamilton had whispered under his breath during that moment of visible disdain. Amateur lip readers filled forums and comment sections with screenshots, guesses, and slow-motion reenactments, each interpretation feeding the fire. On Twitter, hashtags trended globally within minutes. Hashtag HandshakeGate, hashtag ChicaneClash, and hashtag Hamilton vs. Leclerc dominated the top spots. Reddit threads exploded with frame-by-frame analyses of the overtaking maneuver that had led to the whole catastrophe. Fans and pundits alike began accusing each other of blind allegiance, turning every corner of social media into a battleground of bias, loyalty, and outrage. Some said Leclerc had deliberately squeezed Hamilton into the curb. Others claimed the seven-time world champion was simply refusing to accept the rise of a rival who didn't defer to his achievements. TikTok influencers created comedic sketches, reenactments, and sarcastic breakdowns. Instagram meme pages were flooded with photoshopped images, comparing the duo to infamous rivals from other sports, literature, and history. In less than a day, the drama had transcended Formula One. It had become a pop culture event. Inside the paddock, the broadcast networks were in overdrive. Sky Sports assembled an emergency panel, with Martin Brundle, Damon Hill, and Naomi Schiff engaging in heated debate. They scrutinized every data point, steering angles, throttle traces, braking zones. Heat maps lit up on monitors as commentators argued over intent versus error, instinct versus calculation. Telemetry from both cars was leaked in snippets by insiders too eager to stay quiet, only adding fuel to an already roaring fire. On French and Italian television, former F1 drivers passionately defended Leclerc, portraying him as a young lion forced to stake his territory. In the UK, voices were more sympathetic to Hamilton, with commentators invoking his legacy and warning of the sport's increasing volatility. Meanwhile, in the Ferrari enclosure, the mood was volatile and defiant. Charles Leclerc was livid, his usually composed demeanor shattered. He had refused a private debrief with senior engineers and rejected an internal review session that would have dissected the lap in question. To those around him, it was clear he felt betrayed, not just by the media portrayal, but by the paddock's reluctance to support his side. He was overheard telling his race engineer that he wasn't going to be thrown under the bus for defending a legal position. During the official press conference, he radiated indignation. His answers were short, clipped, but laced with venom. When asked if he might reconsider the way he defended against Hamilton, Leclerc leaned forward and said, "I don't drive to make others comfortable. If Lewis wants an easy pass, he's in the wrong era." The room went silent for a few seconds, a silence not of confusion, but of collective realization that something fundamental had shifted between them. Just a few feet away, Lewis Hamilton sat with a calm exterior that masked something far more intense. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't interrupt. But the air around him felt heavy with resentment. When pressed on the nature of the interaction, he avoided direct attacks but chose words calculated to wound. "You can feel when someone's racing you with respect, and when they're racing to make a point," he stated. Then came the pivotal moment, an inquiry about the now infamous handshake. Without blinking, Hamilton replied, "Sometimes you shake a hand because it's expected, not because it's earned." The tension in the room spiked instantly. The temperature seemed to drop. The media picked up the quote and ran with it within minutes. News outlets in over a dozen countries had headlines crafted before the session even ended. As the night deepened over the circuit, more shadows fell across the sport's hierarchy. The FIA summoned senior team representatives for an unscheduled assembly. Officially, it was framed as a routine regulatory discussion, but everyone involved understood the real reason. Two of the grid's most high-profile drivers were on the verge of a protracted feud, and the governing body had to act before things escalated beyond control. Toto Wolff arrived first, entering through a back entrance to avoid the cameras, followed shortly by Fred Vasseur, who had dropped all other obligations to attend. Both men looked tense, their expressions betraying the political minefield they were navigating. Insider whispers began to paint a darker picture. Hamilton, reportedly disgusted by what he called the degradation of sportsmanship, had refused to attend the prestigious post-race banquet hosted by the Italian Grand Prix Committee. His team confirmed his absence, citing recent interactions that violated professional standards. Though no names were mentioned, it was obvious who he referred to. The organizers, blindsided, scrambled to adjust the seating chart while journalists speculated whether the snub had deeper implications. Sponsors too began asking questions, some concerned, others intrigued, all aware that the Hamilton-Leclerc saga had entered a new phase. This was no longer about points, podiums, or pole positions. It was about pride, identity, and control over the narrative. Back at the team bases, engineers noticed the fallout trickling into technical areas. Setup data, normally shared openly between teammates and across support crews, started to disappear from joint databases. Mercedes' simulation group reportedly locked certain files from view. Ferrari's trackside strategists began requesting solo briefings for Leclerc. It was clear, the emotional explosion had breached the operational wall. What began as a racing conflict was now contaminating workflow, planning, and trust. In the larger ecosystem of Formula One, the effects were immediate and wide-reaching. Liberty Media executives were glued to real-time sentiment trackers. Social media engagement hit unprecedented highs. Television ratings spiked, not just for the race itself, but for all surrounding content. Interviews, replays, podcasts, all surged in viewership. Merchandising saw a sudden boom in faction-based sales. Online stores reported record purchases of Hamilton and Leclerc gear, but the buying patterns were no longer crossover. Fans were choosing sides. Tribalism had been reignited. It was no longer about admiration, it was about allegiance. Former champions began weighing in publicly. Alain Prost described the fallout as a generational fracture. Mika Hakkinen warned that things might spiral if no intervention occurred. Even Jenson Button, known for his diplomacy, said on air, "We're witnessing the start of something explosive. This isn't just rivalry, it's psychological warfare." Behind closed doors, team psychologists were quietly consulted. Emotional stability, normally a background concern, had become a frontline issue. No one wanted to admit it openly, but the possibility of retaliation, on track or off, was becoming increasingly plausible. For the fans, it was electrifying. For the sport's elders, it was a warning bell. A singular moment at a chicane in Imola had cracked open decades of tension, ambition, and unresolved competitive baggage. And as the trucks began their slow journey out of the paddock under the darkened Italian sky, a new reality had set in. This wasn't just about one race. It wasn't just a clash of driving styles. It was a collision of eras, philosophies, and egos. The embers had only just begun to glow. What lay ahead was a wildfire that would rage through the heart of Formula One.